Nancy Bennett had never known her father. She knew only that her mother, Mary Bennett, had once been a vicar's daughter who worked briefly as a governess. That she had been cast out, penniless and disgraced, and forced to deliver her daughter at the Foundling Hospital in Bloomsbury, the charity institution founded by Thomas Coram in 1739. Mary Bennett had died 3 hours after Nancy drew her first breath. By 20, the Foundling Hospital sent her to Beaulieu Palace House as governess to 6 orphan children. Children like her. She loved them fiercely. And she told herself it was enough. Until the day the Duke arrived. And Lucy fell ill. Hampshire, England. January 1827. The gates of Beaulieu Palace House opened without sound, and Nancy Bennett knew before she turned that her world had ended. Not with the children's laughter still echoing across the stone courtyard. Not with the small arms of 3-year-old Lucy wrapped tight around her neck, her small body burning with fever. But with the arrival of a man whose carriage bore a crest she recognized from forbidden dreams, a silver stag on midnight blue, the Mark of Ashford. 23 years she had lived at the Foundling Hospital in London. 23 years as the unwanted daughter of a woman who died screaming her name, leaving behind nothing but a tarnished locket and a single word whispered to the midwife, Bennett. 23 years of cold that bit through thin cotton, of hunger that hollowed her stomach, of hands cracked and bleeding from lye soap and freezing water. Her dress hung loose on a frame too thin, her breath visible in the January air, her fingers so numb she could barely feel Lucy's fevered skin against her neck. Nancy had buried that word deep. It was dangerous to want answers when you had nothing to offer in return. But the Duke had not come for answers. He stood beside the iron gate now, tall and unmoving, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Not watching the children. Not assessing the grounds. Watching her, as though he had been searching not for 6 weeks, but for 23 years. Lucy coughed, a wet, rattling sound that Nancy knew too well. 3 children had died of fever at the Foundling Hospital last winter. She felt the small body shudder against her shoulder. "Miss Nancy," Lucy whispered, her voice thin and papery. "Don't leave me like Mama Sarah did." Mama Sarah. The last governess. Dead of consumption 4 months ago, leaving the children to Nancy's inadequate care. Nancy's throat tightened. The head matron appeared at Nancy's shoulder, her voice thin and sharp. "His Grace requests to speak with you privately." Nancy's grip tightened on Lucy. "Why?" The matron's face was pale. "He claims you are the legitimate daughter of Lord William Bennett." The world tilted. Legitimate. Not a bastard. Not forgotten. Not discarded. Lucy coughed again, her small fingers clutching Nancy's worn collar. The Duke took a single step forward, and his voice carried across the distance between them, low, certain, and edged with something Nancy could not name. "Miss Bennett, I have traveled 3 counties to find you, and I will not leave until you understand exactly who you are." Nancy Bennett had never known her father. She knew only that her mother, Mary Bennett, had once been a vicar's daughter who worked briefly as a governess. That she had carried a child with no husband to claim it. That she had been cast out, penniless and disgraced, and forced to deliver her daughter at the Foundling Hospital in Bloomsbury, the charity institution founded by Thomas Coram in 1739 to save abandoned children. Mary Bennett had died 3 hours after Nancy drew her first breath, her fever too high, her body too broken, her final words too faint for anyone but the midwife to hear. No one had told Nancy anything. The hospital nurses had raised her as they raised all forgotten daughters, with duty, not affection. She learned to sew, to scrub, to keep silent when the wealthier families came through selecting servants. By 16, she was too old to be adopted, too plain to be noticed, and too educated for her own good. At 20, the Foundling Hospital sent her to Beaulieu Palace House in Hampshire as governess to the 6 orphan children housed in the estate's east wing. Children like her. She loved them fiercely. She taught them everything she knew. She gave them the tenderness she had never received. And she told herself it was enough. Until the day the Duke arrived. And Lucy fell ill. Nancy descended the stone steps slowly, Lucy still clinging to her skirts, burning with fever, the other children gathering behind her in protective formation. The Duke had not moved. He stood with the stillness of someone accustomed to being obeyed, his tailored coat severe against the winter gray, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. But his eyes, deep gray, almost storm-colored, held something unexpected. Regret. The matron hovered nearby, clearly unsure whether to curtsy or flee. "Your Grace, Miss Bennett has served faithfully for 3 years. If there has been some misunderstanding—" "There has been no misunderstanding," the Duke interrupted quietly. "Only a grave injustice that I intend to correct." He turned fully to Nancy, and she felt the weight of his focus like a physical thing. "Miss Bennett, do you possess any object from your mother? Anything she might have left you?" Nancy's hand moved instinctively to the hidden pocket of her dress, where the tarnished locket lay, the only thing she owned that felt like proof she had ever been loved. She hesitated, feeling Lucy's fevered weight against her hip. Then withdrew it with shaking fingers. The Duke's expression shifted, confirmation, not surprise. "May I?" Nancy placed the locket in his palm, her fingers trembling not just from cold. He opened it with practiced ease, revealing the faded miniature portrait inside, a young woman with soft features and desperate eyes. And on the reverse, barely visible, an inscription worn nearly smooth by time. "For Mary, from W.B. Always." "W.B., the Duke said softly, almost to himself. "Lord William Bennett. My closest friend. Your father." Nancy's knees threatened to give out. Lucy whimpered against her, too weak to stand. The Duke closed the locket carefully and returned it to her, then looked down at the feverish child with something that might have been compassion. "The child is ill." "Fever," Nancy said, her voice barely steady. 3 days now. Then we have no time to waste." He gestured to his carriage. "The inheritance your father left includes funds enough to summon the finest physicians in Hampshire. For her. For all of them." Nancy felt something crack inside her chest. "For Lucy. For the children." The Duke continued, his voice measured. "Your mother was not a governess by birth, Miss Bennett. She was the daughter of a country vicar, educated and genteel. William met her during the summer of 1803, when she was visiting her cousin near Sevenoaks in Kent." He paused, and Nancy saw the tightness in his jaw. "He loved her. Desperately. But he was the second son of an earl, with no fortune and a family that demanded he marry wealth. When Mary told him she carried his child, he chose his family's expectations over his heart. He arranged for her to be sent away quietly, with a small sum of money and a promise he never kept, that he would come for her once his circumstances improved." Nancy felt something cold and heavy settle in her chest. "But he never came." "No," the Duke agreed. "Because 3 months later, in November 1803, he died. Typhoid fever, sudden and merciless. He was only 26 years old. He never knew whether you were born alive. He never knew if Mary survived." The silence stretched. Lucy's breathing was shallow, labored. "And how do you know all this?" The Duke met her eyes directly. "Because on his deathbed, fevered and hallucinating, William confessed everything to me. He begged me to find Mary, to provide for her and the child if it lived. To make amends for the cowardice he no longer had time to repair himself." A bitter smile crossed his face. "I was 19. I thought I had all the time in the world. I searched for Mary Bennett for months, but the trail ended in Bloomsbury at a boarding house that had burned down 2 years prior. I assumed she had perished. That the child, if there had been one, was lost as well." He drew a folded document from his coat. "Until 6 weeks ago, when my solicitor was settling estate matters in Hampshire and came across a record from the Foundling Hospital. Child delivered January 1804. Mother deceased. Name, Nancy Bennett. Father, unknown." Nancy's breath caught. "I did not forget my promise," the Duke said quietly. "I simply believed it was too late to keep it." He held out the document. "But it is not too late, Miss Bennett. Your father left you a will, drafted in September 1803, before he died. £800 per annum, to be held in trust and administered by me, James Thorne, Duke of Ashford, until you reached majority or married. £800 per year. For her entire life. Nancy could barely comprehend the number. The trust has been accruing interest for 23 years, James continued. The current sum available to you is approximately £22,000. Nancy looked down at the document, at numbers too large to mean anything real. I don't understand. Why would your friend leave his inheritance to a child he never acknowledged? James's expression softened, just slightly. Because guilt does not require presence, Miss Bennett. And sometimes love expresses itself only when it is far too late. William knew he was dying. In his final hours, he tried to do what he could not do in life. Provide for you. Protect you. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Nancy could hear. You have a choice. You may refuse the inheritance, remain here, and continue as governess. I will not force your hand. Or you may accept what is legally yours and allow me to fulfill the promise I made to a dying friend 23 years ago. His gray eyes held hers. I cannot undo your childhood. I cannot restore the years you should have known comfort instead of charity. But I can ensure that from this moment forward, Nancy Bennett, you will never again be forgotten. You will never again be cold. You will never again watch a child die because you cannot afford a physician. Before I tell you what happens next, I need to know you're here. Are you watching from Mumbai? From Mexico City? From a place I can't even pronounce? Leave a comment with your city. Because Nancy spent 23 years being invisible, and the only way she stops being invisible is if people like you refuse to let her story disappear. Don't scroll past. Let her know she matters. Lucy coughed again, a sound that tore through Nancy's resolve like paper. Nancy looked down at the child she loved, at the children gathered behind her, at the life she had built from scraps and determination. Then she looked at the Duke, at James Thorne, at the man who held her future in legal documents and belated honor. I will accept the inheritance on one condition, she said quietly. James raised an eyebrow. Which is? That you tell me exactly why a duke would spend 6 weeks searching for the forgotten daughter of a minor lord he barely knew. And why you look at me as though you've seen a ghost. For the first time, something flickered in James's carefully controlled expression. Something that looked almost like fear. Because some promises haunt us more than others, he said slowly. And because when I finally found you, Miss Bennett, you looked exactly like someone I failed to save once before. He paused, his jaw tightening. But there is something else. Something William made me promise never to tell you unless you asked the right question. And you have not asked it yet. Nancy's heart pounded. What question? The Duke's eyes held hers, and in them she saw secrets layered like old wounds. I will know it when you ask it. Until then, all you need to know is this: your father may have been a coward, and I may have been negligent. But you are not forgotten. You never were. He offered his hand. Will you come with me to Highclere Castle, Miss Bennett? There is much to discuss, and much I suspect you will want to know about the father you never met. And most importantly, there is a physician waiting who can save that child's life. Nancy placed Lucy in the arms of the eldest child, a girl of 10 named Martha. Take her inside. Keep her warm. I will return with a physician within the hour. She kissed Lucy's fevered forehead. I promise. You promise? Lucy whispered, her eyes barely open. I promise. And I keep my promises. Then Nancy placed her hand in James Thorne's. The gates of Beaulieu Palace House closed behind them as the carriage rolled forward, and Nancy did not look back, not at the children, not at Lucy's fevered form disappearing into the grey house. She looked ahead, toward a future she had never imagined, toward a truth that had waited 23 years to be unraveled. And toward a man whose grey eyes held secrets she was only beginning to understand. In his eyes, she saw something that terrified her more than poverty ever had: recognition. As though he'd been searching for her not for 6 weeks, but for 23 years. As though finding her had answered a question he'd been asking since long before she was born. And as though the answer might destroy them both. James Thorne did not sleep that night. Lying in the immaculate bed at Highclere Castle, he watched shadows drift across the high ceiling while the fire in the hearth crackled softly, nearly spent. He was 31 years old. William Bennett had died when James was 19, and for 12 years James had believed his promise impossible to keep. Until 6 weeks ago. And now, lying in the darkness at 2 in the morning, he held a letter that could destroy everything. The seal had been broken hours ago, but he read it again by candlelight, each word a carefully calculated blow. The handwriting was feminine, elegant, venomous. Your Grace, I am informed you have located a young woman claiming to be the natural daughter of my late husband, Lord William Bennett. I write to inform you that I contest any inheritance left to this person. My husband was a man of honor who would never have acknowledged a bastard, and I will not allow his memory to be tarnished by the schemes of a fortune-hunting orphan. I have retained solicitors in London and will pursue every legal remedy available to protect my late husband's estate from fraud. Lady Beatrice Bennett. James let the letter fall to his lap. William's widow. A woman William had married in 1809, 6 years after Mary Bennett's death, a marriage of convenience to a wealthy merchant's daughter. William had confessed it all on his deathbed. I married Beatrice for her money. I never loved her. I never stopped loving Mary. Promise me you'll find the child. Promise me. And now Beatrice, who had tolerated a loveless marriage for 18 years, who had buried William in 1827 without shedding a tear, had decided that his guilt money would not go to his bastard daughter. James rose and went to the window. London slept beneath the snow, indifferent. He would not fail William again. Not this time. Even if it meant fighting William's widow in court. Even if it meant teaching a young woman raised at the Foundling Hospital how to manage an estate. Even if it meant watching Nancy Bennett every morning at 9 o'clock and pretending he felt nothing beyond duty. That was the real problem. What he'd felt when he saw her holding that fevered child. When she'd knelt and promised Lucy she would return. When she'd asked him why he looked at her like he'd seen a ghost. Because she looked like Mary. Not exactly, but enough. Enough to remind him that he'd been 19 and powerless when William died. Enough to remind him that he'd searched for 3 months and given up. Enough to make him understand that some failures haunted you forever. James dressed quickly, called for his fastest horse, and rode through the night toward London. The roads were frozen, treacherous, but he pushed hard, arriving at his solicitor's chambers before dawn. Blackstone answered the door in his nightclothes, irritated until he saw James's face. Your Grace? William Bennett's widow is contesting the will. I need every legal precedent, every defense, every strategy. And I need it now. Blackstone's eyes sharpened. On what grounds? Fraud. She claims Nancy Bennett is an impostor. And is she? James held up the locket. This was her mother's. William gave it to Mary Bennett in the summer of 1803. The inscription matches his handwriting. I have the will, drafted September 1803, witnessed by 2 men who are still alive. And I have the Foundling Hospital records showing a child delivered January 1804, mother deceased, name Nancy Bennett. Lady Beatrice will argue that the child could be anyone's. Then we find the midwife who delivered her. We find anyone who saw William with Mary. We prove it beyond doubt. Blackstone took the locket, examined it. This will be expensive, Your Grace. And public. Very public. I don't care. You should. Lady Beatrice has connections. If she makes this a scandal, your reputation will suffer. Your position in the House of Lords could be questioned. James felt something cold settle in his chest. Then let it be questioned. James returned to Highclere as the sun rose, exhausted, hollow. Mrs. Pritchard met him at the door. Your Grace, Mr. Thornby wishes to speak with you. Urgently. Thornby, his steward for 15 years. James found him in the study, pacing. Your Grace, I must speak plainly. Then do. Bringing this woman into your home will ruin your reputation. The entire county is talking. They say she is your mistress, that you fabricated the inheritance to justify keeping her here, that you have disgraced the title. James felt fury rise in his throat. And what do you say, Thornby? The steward hesitated. I say that you are a man of honor. But I also say that honor does not protect against scandal. If Lady Beatrice contests the will publicly, if she accuses Miss Bennett of fraud, society will not care about truth. They will care only about entertainment. Your political career, your influence, your connections, all of it will be questioned. Then let them question. Your Grace. I made a promise to a dying man, James said, his voice colder than the winter wind outside. I will keep that promise even if it costs me every connection, every ally, every shred of respectability I possess. William Bennett saved this estate. He taught me everything I know about administration, about honor, about duty. I owe him a debt I can never repay. And I will not abandon his daughter the way he abandoned her mother. Is that clear? Thornby stared at him, then slowly nodded. It is clear, Your Grace. He paused at the door. Though I wonder if you know exactly what you are protecting. A fortune? Or the woman who inherited it? James did not answer because he did not have one. Morning came with fresh snow and a note delivered by a mud-splattered messenger. James recognized the handwriting at once, large, careful letters from someone who had learned to write too late in life but wrote with fierce precision. He unfolded the paper and read. Your Grace, I accept your guardianship. The physician arrived within the hour, exactly as you promised. Lucy will recover. He says the fever broke just in time. I owe you a debt I can never repay. I will serve you faithfully and learn everything you require of me. I will not dishonor the trust my father placed in you. Nancy Bennett. Nothing more. No gratitude beyond necessity, no emotion beyond relief about a child James would never meet. That, he realized, was strength, not docility. An hour later he returned to Beaulieu Palace House. Nancy was waiting in the courtyard. She wore the same simple dress, but now had on the new boots he'd sent ahead. Lucy stood beside her, pale but alive, holding Nancy's hand with fierce determination. Are you ready? James asked Nancy. Yes, she replied. She knelt before Lucy. Martha will care for you while I am gone. But I will send for you soon. I promise. You said that before, Lucy said, her voice still weak but edged with something that sounded like hope. And I kept my promise, didn't I? Nancy touched the child's cheek. I will always keep my promises to you. Lucy threw her arms around Nancy's neck. I love you, Miss Nancy. I love you too, little one. James watched, and something twisted in his chest. During the journey to Highclere, they sat on opposite sides of the carriage. The distance was proper, necessary. Nancy watched the world through the window with quiet focus, not distracted, assessing. When we arrive at Highclere Castle, James said at last, Mrs. Pritchard will attend to your immediate needs. Nancy nodded. But starting tomorrow, your training begins. Training? She asked, turning to him. Estate administration, he explained. Money without knowledge is risk. Your inheritance must be understood before it is used. It includes more than the £800 annually. There is a commercial property in Bristol yielding £400 per year. Shipping company shares yielding approximately 500. And 300 in fixed income from government bonds. In total, £1,200 per annum. Nancy's eyes widened. 1,200? Yes. And you will learn to manage every penny of it. And your Grace will teach me. I am your legal guardian. It is my duty. The word fell heavily between them. Nancy turned back to the window. I understand, she said simply. You are obligated by law and by a promise to a dead man. Nothing more. James wanted to correct her, to say that duty was not the whole of it, but he could not. Not yet. Not when William's widow was already sharpening her legal knives. There is something you should know, he said carefully. William's widow, Lady Beatrice Bennett, has been informed of your existence. She is displeased. Nancy's expression did not change. She contests the inheritance. Yes. Will she win? James met her gaze. Not if I can prevent it. And if you cannot? Then you will have learned enough to survive without it. He paused. But I do not intend to lose, Miss Bennett. I intend to fight for what your father wanted you to have. Even if that fight destroys me. When the gates of Highclere Castle came into view, Nancy caught her breath. It is large, she murmured. It is prosperous, James corrected. Well-managed, debt-free, sustainable. He paused. My father left me debts and a crumbling estate in 1823. William taught me how to save it. Without him, I would have lost everything. She looked at the house with different understanding. Then you owe him too. More than I can ever repay. At the entrance, servants stood in line, watching. Miss Bennett, James said, now in his public tone. This is Mrs. Pritchard, my housekeeper. The woman assessed Nancy with professional precision, then surprised James by curtsying. Welcome, Miss Bennett. His Grace has told me of your arrival. I am at your service. Nancy nodded, gripping her small bundle. Tomorrow at 9, James said. We will meet in the library. He turned to enter, then stopped. Nancy, he said quietly. I know this is not easy. But you are no longer alone. She met his gaze for a brief moment. No, she replied. Now I am merely a legal obligation. One you will fight for in court. I will fight for what is right. And if what is right costs you everything. James felt the weight of Thornby's warning, of the widow's letter, of the scandal already brewing. Then I will be ruined, he said simply. But the title will survive. Your future will not. And she went inside before he could say more. James remained outside, the cold biting at his fingers. Obligation. It was true. But standing there in the snow, holding a letter from a vengeful widow and the memory of Nancy kneeling beside a fevered child, James Thorne realized something that terrified him. He had promised William he would protect her. He had not promised he would survive doing it. And staring at the legal challenge ahead, knowing the court battle that loomed, the scandal that would follow, the political allies he would lose, he understood one devastating truth. Protecting Nancy Bennett might cost him everything. And he would pay it. He would pay it all. Nancy did not sleep well on her first night at Highclere Castle. The room was far too large, larger than the entire dormitory at the Foundling Hospital combined where she'd lived from 1804 to 1824. 20 years in that cold building. The canopied bed, the deep blue velvet coverlets, the fireplace kept steadily alight. Everything seemed designed for someone who knew how to take up space. She spent hours seated in the armchair by the window, watching the snow-covered gardens beneath the pale moon. 2 days earlier, she had been invisible. Now she was an heiress contested by a widow who believed her a fraud. At precisely 9 o'clock the next morning, Nancy descended to the library. The maid had helped her into one of the new dresses, dark green wool, simple in cut but proper. Nancy lingered before the mirror. The woman reflected there looked capable, contained, almost respectable, but she felt like an imposter. The library was vast, shelves from floor to ceiling, the scent of old paper and leather. James was already there, standing by the window. No coat, white shirt, dark waistcoat, his black hair slightly undone. He looked exhausted from midnight rides and legal battles. He lifted his gaze. Punctual. Sit. Nancy complied. James took the seat opposite her, creating proper distance. He placed papers before her. Let us begin with the essential. Can you read? I can. I read well. The Foundling Hospital taught all children to read and write. He nodded. Your inheritance includes 3 primary sources of income. First, a commercial property in Bristol. A warehouse leased to a textile merchant named Thomas Whitmore. He has occupied it for 12 years at £200 per annum. Second, shares in the British Mercantile Company, yielding approximately £500 annually. Third, £300 in fixed income from government bonds. Total, £1,200 per year. Nancy's hands trembled. For perspective, James continued, a gentleman's family lives comfortably on £200 per year. You have the income of 6 gentlemen. The next hour passed in methodical explanation. Then he slid a contract across the table. This is the Bristol property lease. Read it. Tell me if you would accept these terms. This was a test. Nancy read carefully. The tenant, Thomas Whitmore, had occupied the warehouse for 12 years. Current rent, £200 annually, with a clause stating rent fixed in perpetuity, subject to annual renewal. Nancy saw the problem. The rent is too low, she said. Market rate is at least £350. We're losing £150 per year. If we offer him a longer lease 5 years instead of annual renewal, we can negotiate a fair increase. He gains stability. We gain proper income. James was silent too long. Nancy's confidence faltered. Did I understand correctly? You understood the financial structure, James said carefully. But you missed something critical. Thomas Whitmore employs 47 men in his textile operation. If we force an increase he cannot afford, he will close the warehouse. 47 families lose their income. The property sits empty while we search for a new tenant, perhaps for months. We lose everything, and 47 families starve. Nancy felt her face burn with shame. 47 families. Real people. She had seen only numbers, not consequences. I failed, she whispered. You made a common error, James corrected, his voice firm. You saw the problem but not the cost. Every financial decision affects human lives. That is what you must learn. Nancy's hand shook as she set down the contract. The quill slipped from her fingers, left an ink stain. She tried to blot it, made it worse, felt tears prick her eyes. I'm sorry. Stop. Even I make mistakes. That's why we use pencil first. He slid a fresh sheet across. Read it again. Take your time. Think about the people, not just the profit. Nancy drew a steady breath and tried again. This time she saw the balance. We cannot raise the rent significantly without destroying him, she said slowly. But the current rate is unjust. So we offer a compromise, a modest increase to £300, fixed for 5 years. We sacrifice potential profit, but we keep a reliable tenant and preserve 47 jobs. James leaned back, and something like approval flickered. Exactly. That is pragmatism. That is responsibility. But I only understood after you told me about the families. Then you learned. That is the point, Nancy. Not perfection. Growth. He paused. This contract is real. Thomas Whitmore is real. If you make the wrong recommendation, real people suffer. Can you accept that responsibility? Nancy thought of Lucy's fevered face, of the children she'd left behind. Yes, she said. Because if I don't learn, someone else will make decisions for me. And I will never be free. James held her gaze, and Nancy saw something shift, a recognition deeper than professional respect. No, he agreed quietly. You will never be free if you remain ignorant. Which is why tomorrow, we do this again. And the day after. Until you can see the consequences before they happen. When Nancy rose to leave, her hands were still shaking. She stopped at the door. May I ask something? Yes. Why did he leave me all this if he never had the courage to acknowledge me? If he loved my mother, why did he let her die alone? James took longer to answer. Because guilt is easier than facing the world, he said at last. And it was all William Bennett was capable of offering. He paused. But I will tell you something he told me on his deathbed. He said, I was too much of a coward to love her in life. At least let me provide for her daughter in death. It was not enough. But it was something. Nancy absorbed that in silence. Thank you, she said, not to James, but to the ghost of a father she would never know. Later, alone in the bedchamber, Nancy wrote a letter to Lucy. Dearest Lucy, the Duke kept his promise. You are well. And I am learning things I never imagined. Someday soon, I will bring you here, and you will never be cold again. I promise. Your Nancy. She sealed it and left it for the morning post. Then she sat at the writing desk and practiced with the quill until her hand stopped shaking. She wrote the numbers over and over. 400, 500, 300, 1200. Until they felt real. Until they felt like hers. In the library, James remained seated far longer than intended. The chair across from him was empty, but the ink stain remained where Nancy's hand had slipped. He traced it with one finger. She had refused to quit even when humiliated. And for the first time since accepting that promise, he felt something beyond duty. He didn't just admire her competence. He admired her. All of her. And that was forbidden. Because she was his ward, his responsibility, entirely dependent on him. Because wanting her would destroy them both. James pressed his fingers to his eyes. Control. He needed control. But watching Nancy Bennett correct her own error, refusing to quit even when her hands trembled, James Thorne realized something terrifying. He might not have enough control to survive 2 years of this. Of her. Of mornings at 9 o'clock when she arrived exactly on time. 3 weeks at Highclere. Nancy could now read contracts faster than James's solicitor. And that morning, she found something devastating. The Bristol administrator has been embezzling, Nancy said, sliding calculations across the table. For 6 years. Nearly £1,000 total. James looked at the numbers. Clear, damning. The administrator, Harrington, had been inflating operating costs. £50 here, 70 there. But Nancy had cross-referenced shipping invoices against expense reports. 12 discrepancies. How did you find this? The invoices don't match. He claimed 300 for repairs. The actual invoice was 180. James should have felt satisfaction. He felt dread. If we expose him, Lady Beatrice uses it as evidence the entire estate is corrupt. So we let him steal? We dismiss him quietly. Nancy stood. And the families he's stolen from? They get no justice because my reputation matters more? The argument escalated. Nancy demanded exposure. James demanded strategy. Finally, James said what a duke should say, I am trying to protect you. Nancy's response cut him, by teaching me that justice is conditional? James had no answer. Because she was right. And watching her refuse to be pragmatic, refuse to let theft go unpunished even when it would cost her everything, he felt something shift. That afternoon, Mrs. Pritchard delivered evening correspondence. Lady Catherine Hollister's invitation. Her nephew Robert will attend. Unmarried, from a good family. James felt something cold twist in his chest. Robert Hollister. 28, charming, wealthy. The kind of man who could court Nancy without scandal. That night, James tried to work and failed. He tried to read and failed. He tried not to imagine Nancy dancing with Robert Hollister, laughing at his jokes, considering his inevitable proposal. And failed. He closed his eyes and saw Nancy's face when she argued for exposing Harrington, that fierce moral clarity that would destroy her if he didn't protect it. He saw her hands shaking over that first contract, saw her kneeling beside Lucy, saw her standing in his library demanding justice even when it would cost her everything. And he understood with sickening certainty, this wasn't admiration. This wasn't respect. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but the dreams were worse. Nancy in Robert Hollister's arms, wearing Robert Hollister's ring, leaving Highclere Castle for a life James could never offer. And when he woke gasping, his heart pounding not with fear but with rage, he finally admitted the truth he'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. This wasn't admiration. This wasn't professional respect. This was want. Raw, impossible, forbidden want. If you're still here, watching Nancy fight for what's right even when it'll cost her everything, I need you to do something. Comment your city. Hit subscribe. Because every time you engage, you're telling Nancy that women who refuse to stay silent matter. And if you scroll past, she goes back to being invisible. Don't do that to her. And it was going to destroy them both. Harrington filed a lawsuit. Wrongful dismissal. Claiming Nancy invented the fraud. 48 hours to settle or open court. If this goes to court, Lady Beatrice has everything, James said. Then I'll get the original invoices from Bristol. Absolutely not. I know what to look for. They argued. Finally, James said, Bristol's warehouse district is dangerous. You're a woman traveling alone. Then come with me. I can't. House of Lords vote tomorrow. Nancy's eyes held his. If anything happened to me, you'd be free. No scandal, no obligation. James went white. Do not ever suggest that your death would be convenient. Nancy left within the hour. Mrs. Pritchard accompanied her. They reached Bristol at sunset. The clerk opened the files. There, original invoices, pristine, proving Harrington's theft. Nancy was halfway to the carriage when a hand grabbed her arm. Harrington sent me. Can't have orphans ruining good men. Nancy tried to pull away. He tightened his grip. Mrs. Pritchard screamed. Then James was there. He'd left the vote. Ridden through the night. His fist connected with the man's jaw. Touch her again and I will kill you. The man ran. James turned to Nancy, his hands shaking. Are you hurt? No. How are you here? I couldn't let you face this alone. She held up the invoices. I have the proof. James looked at the documents, then at her. His hands were still shaking. Not from anger. From fear. In the carriage home, silence. Finally Nancy said his name. James. He looked up. Want, terrible and forbidden, in his eyes. Thank you, she whispered. He didn't answer. Because when that man touched her, James had wanted to kill him. And sitting across from her in the darkness, James understood, he would do anything to protect her. Even the things that would destroy them both. Lady Catherine Hollister's mansion. Robert waiting in the entrance. Miss Bennett. I've heard so much. The mysterious heiress. Handsome, practiced, calculating. Perhaps you might visit my estate, offer your advice? It was courtship. Thinly veiled. Across the table, James's jaw clenched. Halfway through dinner, wine accidentally flooded Nancy's dress. The woman beside her, oh, how clumsy. But Nancy heard whispers. Smirks. Not an accident. Lady Catherine, the powder room is down the hall. Nancy excused herself. Tried to blot the stain. Heard voices outside. Bastard gold digger. She trapped the Duke. Nancy gripped the sink. Tears came, hot and angry. 23 years invisible, and now this. The door opened. James. Nancy. She turned away. I'm fine. No. He crossed to her, turned her to face him. You are not fine. And you don't have to pretend. They hate me. They'll always hate me. James touched her shoulder. You are not a bastard. You are not stealing anything. You are exactly where you should be. Why can't you say that publicly? Because I am your guardian. Distance is expected. And if you weren't? James's hand dropped. Then everything would be different. They stood too close. The space between them charged. James stepped back. Come. We're leaving. But as they walked back, someone saw. A servant. Widened eyes. They'd been alone. Unchaperoned. Improper. By morning, the county would know. Here's what I need from you right now. You just watched Nancy break down for the first time, cry in a powder room while people called her a bastard gold digger. And if you scroll past without commenting your city, without subscribing, without engaging with this story, it's like you're agreeing with them. Like you're saying she doesn't matter. Don't be that person. Drop your location. Let Nancy know she's not alone. In the carriage, silence. I've ruined you, Nancy said. You have done nothing wrong. They saw us. I know. And I don't care. You should. Is worth less than your dignity. He turned to her. Nancy, I need to tell you something. Don't. But he continued. Teaching you ceased to be obligation some time ago. It is realizing I anticipate 9 o'clock more than I should. It is no longer being able to pretend this is only duty. Then what is it? Something I have no right to feel. You are my ward. Any feeling I have compromises your freedom. What if I feel the same? James closed his eyes. Then we are both damned. That was when he kissed her. Deliberately. Conscious. A choice. Firm, restrained, chosen. When they parted, Nancy whispered, "What do we do now?" James rested his forehead against hers. Now we act with honor, even if it costs us. They had crossed a line. Tomorrow, she would be ruined. And James would have to choose. James spent the night reliving the kiss. The problem, it revealed a man beneath the Duke. At 9, Nancy entered. If you're going to say last night was a mistake. It was not. It was real, but it cannot remain disordered. Disordered how? While I am your guardian, any feeling will be treated as suspect. They'll say I used my position. I will not allow that. Nancy's maid had quit that morning. I won't serve a woman who dishonors herself. By afternoon, the staff knew. By tomorrow, Lady Beatrice would know. What do? I relinquish control. You manage everything. The law allows power of attorney. You will be independent. You're giving me everything. I'm making you free to choose me without anyone calling it disguised gratitude. Nancy touched his face. You're setting me free so you may ask, not claim. Exactly. She kissed him. Brief, chaste. Then I will choose you. And it will be the freest choice I've ever made. 3 weeks later, Solicitor Blackstone arrived. Nancy signed. James witnessed. Done. You are free. And now? Now you live 6 months as absolute owner without my shadow. And when that passes, if you still want me, I will ask. Properly. 6 months. I will wait. That afternoon, Mrs. Pritchard delivered a letter. Lady Beatrice's seal. James read it, face pale. She's filing an injunction to freeze your inheritance. She claims you're an impostor. Court hearing in 2 weeks. The battle had begun. 3 months later, the court. Lady Beatrice brought 15 witnesses. James had 1 locket. But Nancy fought. She testified. Presented the invoices proving Harrington's fraud. Showed her competence, her intelligence, her right to exist. The questions were brutal. The widow's barrister called her a cunning orphan who fabricated an entire inheritance. Nancy stood firm. I fabricated nothing. I exist. My mother existed. And my father, coward though he was, tried to do one honorable thing before he died. Robert Hollister testified. Unexpectedly, for Nancy. I courted Miss Bennett briefly. I found her honest, intelligent, and utterly without guile. The woman Lady Beatrice describes does not exist. Slowly, impossibly, the tide turned. The judge ruled in Nancy's favor. The inheritance was hers. Lady Beatrice's case, dismissed. But James lost his position on the House of Lords Select Committee on Trade. His reputation tarnished. Political career over. That night, Nancy found him. You lost everything for me. I lost nothing that mattered. I would do it again. Every time. 3 more months passed. 6 months total from the legal transfer. Nancy managed the inheritance alone. Increased it to £1,400 per year through competent renegotiation. She didn't need him. And that was the point. Nancy just won. Against a widow with 15 witnesses, against a society that called her a fraud, against every person who said she didn't deserve to exist. And she won. If this story matters to you, if you believe women like Nancy deserve to be remembered, comment your city right now. Subscribe. Like. Because you scrolling past means victories like this disappear. And I won't let that happen to her. Will you? Nancy woke to a letter. James's handwriting. 6 months have passed. You've proven you need no guardian. I allow myself to ask, will you dine with me tonight? Not as ward, but as the woman I wish to court. At 7, Nancy descended. Library transformed. Candles. Intimate table. White lilies. James waiting. You came. I did. I was afraid you'd realize you don't need me. Nancy touched his face. I don't. And that's exactly why I choose you. James took her hands. Before I ask what I want to ask, you need to ask me something. The right question. You've never asked it. Nancy understood. The secret from the first day. Why did you really take 23 years? James closed his eyes. Pain there, old and deep. Because I met your mother once. In 1803. I was 17. William brought me to Sevenoaks. I saw Mary. I saw her roundness, knew about you. But I was 17, powerless, terrified. And I did nothing. He looked at her. Finding you meant facing that I let her die. That I let you suffer. That's why I delayed. Not estates. Not meetings. Cowardice. Like your father. Nancy absorbed this. You were 17. Old enough to help. Too young to have courage. She took his hand. Then we're both children of cowards. And we chose differently. Relief broke across his face. Nancy Bennett, you entered this house as obligation and became the person I admire most. You are my equal. And I love you. He knelt. Will you marry me? Not from duty, not gratitude, but because I want to spend my life at your side. Nancy didn't hesitate. Yes. I choose you. Later, at dinner, I want to transform the Foundling Hospital, Nancy said. So no girl grows up believing she was born without worth. James tightened his grip. Then we'll do it together. Highclere Castle. 1 year later. Nancy woke to golden light. James entered with tea. Good morning, Duchess. Good morning, Duke. The London plans arrived. The Foundling Hospital can double capacity. Nancy spread the drawings. Spacious rooms. Library. Gardens. When do we begin? Next week. If the Duchess approves. The Duchess approves, provided the Duke walks beside her. Always. They stood wrapped in morning light. 2 strangers who found each other at duty's intersection with choice. William would be at peace, James said. I hope so. I'll use money he left from fear to create courage. Outside, gardens bloomed. Within Highclere, the forgotten foundling and the Duke who chose honor remained. No longer guardian and ward. Equal partners. Home. When work at the Foundling Hospital began, Nancy returned with Lucy, now 4. Lucy ran through the new gardens, laughing. Nancy knelt beside her. You'll never be cold again. Because you kept your promise, Miss Nancy. Always. And proving that stories of forgotten women don't end when someone saves them. They end when they save themselves first, then freely choose who walks beside them. Before you close this, I need one last thing from you. I need to know this story mattered. Whether you're in Manila or Manchester, in Sao Paulo or Stockholm, in a city or a village I'll never see, tell me where you are in the comments. Because every time someone shares their location, another forgotten woman somewhere realizes she's not alone. Don't let Nancy's story disappear into the algorithm. Hit subscribe. Drop a like. Leave your city. And if you've ever felt invisible, know this, you're not. You never were. Just like Nancy.